Good morning, great souls. It is Monday morning. My name is Sanjan. We're broadcasting from Ananda, Sacramento. Welcome. This is a wonderful way to start the week, and it is the New Path book study and meditation. And today we have a wonderful chapter, chapter 16, A Pilgrim Meets His Guide. So today we'll be listening to the entire chapter, which is 20 minutes long. I may have a break at some point in the middle just to comment. We're actually going to be quite experiential today, so we will have some deep meditation, because this is the point where Swami Kriyananda, the young J. Donald Walters, meets Paramhansa Yogananda, asks him to be his disciple, and they perform a discipleship ceremony and moment, very deep. So we're going to meditate on that, tune into that moment in time back in 1948, September 12th. And at the same time, we're tuning into our own discipleship. So let's start with just a few chants from Hymn to Brahma, sung by Swami Kriyananda. Then we'll do a prayer, and then we'll go straight into the listening of the book study of this chapter. So just bear with me for one moment. Okay.
Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Brahmanandam Paramasukhadam Kevalam Gyanamurti Dandvatitam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamashya Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadeshakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tvam Namami.
Let's begin with a prayer. Tuning into the masters sitting next to us, on our altars, and most especially within us. Particularly tuning into Yogananda and Swami Kriyananda. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Moshaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, beloved Paramhansa Yogananda, and friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, saints of all religions, we humbly bow at thy feet. O beloved Master, great Guru Paramhansa Yogananda, great disciple Swami Kriyananda, bless this satsang, Bless our spiritual path. And for those that are disciples, bless our discipleship. Infuse us with your Spirit. Help us to receive your wisdom and your vibration through this satsang, through diving into this great text, the new path, and through living our lives for God. Om, peace. Amen. And let's dive into this wonderful chapter. Feeling that Swami Kriyananda is talking directly to us as he reads this to us.
Chapter 16. The Pilgrim Meets His Guide. I arrived in Los Angeles on the morning of Saturday, September 11th, 1948, exhausted from my long journey. There I took advantage of the first opportunity I'd had in 4 days to shave and shower. I then continued south by bus, 100 miles to Encinitas, the little coastal town where, as I'd read, Yogananda had his hermitage. In the fervor of first reading, it had somehow escaped my notice that he'd founded an organization. Perhaps I had subconsciously tuned out this information because of my long-standing resistance to religious institutionalism. In my mind, his little seaside hermitage was all that existed of his work. It was to him I was coming, not to his organization. I arrived in Encinitas late that afternoon, too tired to proceed at once to the hermitage. I booked into a hotel and fairly collapsed onto my bed, sleeping around the clock. The next morning I set out for Self-Realization Fellowship Hermitage, walking perhaps a mile through a neighborhood of picturesque gardens, colorful with ice plant and bougainvillea. Many of the flowers I saw here were new to me. Their vivid hues made a gay contrast to the more conservative flowers in the East, a contrast I was to discover that extends to numerous other aspects of life on the two coasts. I approached the hermitage with bated breath. Yogananda, I recalled from his book, had once visited a saint without sending prior notice of his arrival. He had yet to reach the saint's village when the saint himself came out to welcome him. Did Yogananda too, I asked myself, know I was coming? And would he too come out and greet me? To the second question, anyway, the answer I received was no such luck. I entered the grounds through an attractive gate. On either side of me were large, beautifully kept gardens, trees on the left, beyond a small house. On the right, a pleasant lawn. At the end of the driveway stood a lovely white stucco building with a red tile roof. I imagined disciples going quietly about their simple chores inside, faces shining with inner peace. Did they know I was coming? I rang the front doorbell. Minutes later, a gentle-looking, elderly lady appeared. "May I help you?" she inquired politely. "Is Paramhansa Yogananda in?" My pronunciation of this unfamiliar name must have left something to be desired. Moreover, the white Palm Beach suit I wore didn't mark me as the normal visitor. I'd assumed mistakenly that Palm Beach was the accepted attire in Southern California, as it was in Miami and Havana. My unusual appearance, together with my obvious unfamiliarity with Yogananda's name, must have given the impression that I was a utility man of some sort. "Oh, you've come to check the water?" No, gulping, I repeated. "Is Paramhansa Yogananda in?" "What? Oh, yes, oh, I see. No, I'm afraid he's away for the weekend. Is there something I can do for you?" Well, yes, no, I mean, I wanted to see him. He's lecturing today at the Hollywood Church. You have a church there? I let my astonishment show. I'd always imagined Hollywood as containing only movie studios. My astonishment must have struck my elderly hostess as unseemly. After all, why shouldn't they have a church in a big city like Hollywood? Soon it became clear to me that I wasn't making the best possible impression. Well, I thought perhaps it did seem a bit strange, my bursting in here and asking to speak to the head of whatever organization there was here, and worse still, not even realizing that he had an organization. My companion drew herself up a little stiffly. I want to join his work, I explained. I want to live here. Have you studied his printed lessons? She inquired, a trifle coolly, I thought. Lessons? I echoed blankly. I didn't know he had lessons to be studied. My position was getting murkier by the minute. There's a full course of them. I'm afraid you couldn't join, she continued firmly, until you'd completed the lot. How long does that take? My heart was sinking. About 4 years. 4 years? Why, this was out of the question. As I look back now on that meeting, I think she was probably only trying to temper what must have seemed to her my absurd presumption in assuming I had merely to appear on the scene for me to be welcomed with joyous cries of, "You've arrived!" In fact, the requirements for acceptance were not so strict as she'd made out. It is usual, however, and also quite proper, for the spiritual aspirant's sincerity to be carefully tested. It looked less than proper to me at the time, however. Only later did I learn that this first person to greet me had been Sister Gyanamata, Paramhansa Yogananda's most advanced woman disciple. She herself, as it happened, having been married, had had to wait years before she could enter the hermitage. The mere prospect of a wait must have seemed to her completely normal and not very much of a test. Well, I reflected rebelliously, this was not Yogananda's verdict. Swallowing my disappointment, I inquired how I might get to the Hollywood Church. She gave me the address and a telephone number. Soon I was on my way back to Los Angeles. On the way there, I alternated between bouts of indignation at her presumption and desperate prayers to be accepted. This was the first time in my life I had wanted anything so desperately. I simply mustn't be refused. At one point, thinking again of my elderly informant, my mind was once again waxing indignant when suddenly I remembered her eyes. They had been very calm. Even, I reflected, with some astonishment, wise. Certainly there was far more to her than I'd noticed in the urgency of my desire. Forgive me for my misjudgment, I prayed mentally. It was in any case wrong of me to think unkindly of her. She was only doing her duty. I sense now, however, that she is a great soul. Forgive me.
I'm just going to stop there for a moment, only a brief moment. But what was very interesting is when I was reading this chapter and listening to it, I really made a point of this moment of where Swami Kriyananda, where the young John J. Donald Waters had made this kind of judgment about Sister Gyanamata and this kind of negative thinking. What was interesting also, though, was that I came across this fantastic talk, which I put into the comments. I think it's titled "Things I Learned from My Guru." And it's a wonderful hour and 40 minutes. It's packed full of tips and just sharing his time with Yogananda. But what's very interesting in this talk is he mentions this particular moment where he's had this judgment about Gyanamata, and he goes and he's on the bus and he actually asks for forgiveness inwardly because he realizes he's made a mistake. And what he shares in this talk, which I really encourage you to listen to, is that at that moment, even though he'll carry on and continue with desperate prayers, he said that at that moment, inwardly, he knew he would be accepted. I thought I'd just share that for a moment. So let's go back to the chapter.
A cloud seemed suddenly to lift within me. I knew in my heart that I'd been accepted. Arrived in Los Angeles, I checked my bag at the bus depot and proceeded at once to 4860 Sunset Boulevard, the address of the church I was seeking. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The morning service had ended long since, and the building, apart from a small scattering of people, was empty. A lady greeted me from behind a long table at the back of the room. "May I help you?" I explained my mission. "Oh, I'm afraid you couldn't possibly see him today. His time is completely filled." I was growing more desperate by the minute. "When can I see him?" She consulted a small book on the table before her. "His appointments are fully booked for the next 2.5 months, she informed me. 2.5 months? First I'd been told I couldn't join for 4 years. Now I was told I couldn't even see him for... But I've come all the way from New York just for this. "Have you?" She smiled sympathetically. "How did you hear about him?" "I read his autobiography a few days ago." "So recently, and you came just like that?" She cooled a little. "Usually people write first. Didn't you write?" Bleakly I confessed I hadn't even thought of doing so. "Well, I'm sorry, but you can't see him for another 2.5 months. In the meantime," she continued, brightening a little, "you can study his lessons and attend the services here." Morosely I wandered about the church, studying the furnishings, the architecture, the stained glass windows. It was an attractive chapel, large enough to seat well over 100 people, and invitingly peaceful. An excellent place, I thought, for quiet meditation. But my own mind was hardly quiet or meditative. I was in turmoil. "You must take me," I prayed. "You must. This means everything to me." "It means my whole life." 2 or 3 of the people sitting in the church were monks, whose residence was at the headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship on Mount Washington, in the Highland Park section of Los Angeles. I spoke to one of them. Norman, his name was, tall and well-built. His eyes were yet kind and gentle. He talked a little about their way of life at Mount Washington and their relation as disciples to Paramhansa Yogananda. "We call him Master," he told me. From Autobiography of a Yogi, I already knew that this appellation, which Yogananda used also in reference to his own guru, denoted reverence, not menial subservience. How deeply Norman's description of Mount Washington attracted me. I simply had to become part of this wonderful way of life. It was where I belonged. It was my home. Norman pointed out 2 young men seated quietly further back in the church. "They want to join the monastery too," he remarked. "How long have they been waiting?" "Oh, not long, a few months." Disconsolately, I wandered about a while longer. Finally it occurred to me, novel thought, that perhaps I simply wasn't ready, and that this was why the doors weren't opening for me. If this were true, I decided, I'd just go out and live in the hills near Hollywood, come to the services regularly, study the lessons, and, I sighed, wait. When I was ready, the Master would surely know it and would summon me. With this resolution in mind, and with no small disappointment in my heart, I made for the front door. No doubt I'd needed this lesson in humility. Perhaps things had always gone too easily for me. Maybe I was too confident. At any rate, the moment I accepted the thought of my possibly not being ready spiritually, the situation changed dramatically. I had reached the door when the secretary, Mary Hammond I later learned her name was, came up behind me. "Since you've come such a long way," she said, "I'll just ask Master if he'd be willing to see you today." She returned a few minutes later. "Master will see you next." Shortly thereafter, I was ushered into a small sitting room. The Master was standing there, speaking to a disciple in a white robe. As the young man was about to leave, he knelt to touch the Master's feet. This was, as I had learned from Yogananda's book, a traditional gesture of reverence among Indians. It is bestowed on parents and other elders, as well as, and particularly, on one's guru. A moment later the Master and I were alone. What large lustrous eyes now greeted me! What compassionate sweetness in his smile! Never before had I seen such divine beauty in a human face. The Master seated himself on a chair and motioned me to a sofa beside him. "What may I do for you?" For the third time that day these same gentle words, but this time how fraught with meaning. "I want to be your disciple." The reply welled up from my heart irresistibly. Never had I expected to utter such words to another human being. The Master smiled gently. There ensued a long discussion, interspersed by long silences, during which he held his eyes half open, half closed, reading me as I well knew. Over and over again I prayed desperately in my heart, "You must take me. I know that you know my thoughts. I can't say it outwardly. I'd only burst into tears. But you must accept me. You must." Early in the conversation he had told me, "I agreed to see you only because Divine Mother told me to. I want you to know that. It isn't because you've come such a distance. 2 weeks ago, a lady flew here all the way from Sweden after reading my book, but I wouldn't see her. I do only what God tells me to do." He reiterated, "Divine Mother told me to see you." Divine Mother, as I already knew from reading his book, was the way he often referred to God, who, as he said, embraces both the male and the female principles. There followed some discussion of my past. He appeared to be pleased with my replies and with my truthfulness. I knew that already, he once remarked, indicating that he was only testing me to see if I would answer him truthfully. Again a long silence, while I prayed ardently for acceptance. "I'm taking fewer people now," he said. I gulped. Was this remark intended to prepare me for a letdown? I told him I simply could see nothing for myself in marriage or a worldly life. "I'm sure it's fine for many people," I said, "but for myself I don't want it." He shook his head. "It isn't so fine for anybody as people make out. God for everyone is the only answer. Anything less is a compromise." He went on to tell me a few stories of the disillusionments he had witnessed. Then again, silence. At one point in our discussion he asked me how I had liked his book. "Oh, it was wonderful." "That," he replied simply, "is because it has my vibrations in it." Vibrations? I'd never before thought of books as having vibrations. Clearly, however, I had found his book almost alive in its power to convey not merely ideas but a new state of awareness. Incongruously, even absurdly, it now occurred to me that he might be more willing to take me if he felt I could be of some practical use to his work. And what did I know? Only writing. But that surely was better than nothing. Perhaps he was in need of people with writing skills. To demonstrate this ability, I said, "Sir, I found several split infinitives in your book. 22 years old, literarily untried, but already a budding editor. I've never lived down this faux pas. But Master took it with a surprised, then a good-humoured smile. The motive for my remark was transparent to him.
And let's just stop there for a moment, because we're going to go into the next phase, which will be when Master places his forefinger over the heart of Swami and accepts him as disciple. So a very rich chapter. I was meant to say at the beginning, just, it's amazing. I have the audio version of Swami Kriyananda reading The Path, the original book, and then hearing him now reading the new path towards the end of his life. Just the voice, the humor comes out where he can't stop himself from laughing. He's got that break in his voice. You can feel the desperation. You can feel the emotion and the devotion coming through. It's a very, very powerful, just to tune into the audio of this book. There's many things to say, and I don't want to spend too long on them. The one thing I really want to touch on is just this point that I mentioned about Jnanamata, because it's funny, it's actually in the book. I didn't realize that, even reading it and then listening to the audio, I missed that actually in the book it says that I knew I was accepted, which shows us that it's so easy to miss things. So, but listening to that talk, I really took it in. But what I had picked up on, as I said before, was this negativity. And in the talk that Swami gives, which, it is a long talk, and break it up to every 10 minutes a night for over a period if you want to, or do the whole thing at once, but take the time to really do it while you're concentrated, because it's so rich with so many things. But he really talks about how Master was very firm about not being negative. And what you notice in this also, as he interviews Swami Kriyananda in this interview, when in this first meeting. And this is something that I think I may have mentioned before in a couple of the beginning, but another disciple of Master's had shared about this interview period, and that Yogananda knew everything about each of these people. They could each tell, and there was a third person as well. They could each tell that he knew all of their faults, their whole entire life. And what was one of the most powerful feelings that they felt was that there was no judgment from Master. And so really looking at our own lives, listening to that talk, and exploring and meditating on how judgmental we are with ourselves, how judgmental we are with other people, and really starting to make a practice on seeing the good with everyone. So let's continue on.
More silence, more prayers. All right, he said at last, you have good karma, you may join us. Oh, but I can wait, I blurted out, hoping he wasn't taking me only because I hadn't yet found any other place to live. No, he smiled, you have good karma, otherwise I wouldn't accept you. Gazing at me now with deep love, he said, I give you my unconditional love. Immortal promise. I couldn't begin to fathom the depth of meaning in those words. Will you give me your unconditional love? Yes. And will you also give me your unconditional obedience? Desperately though I desired to be accepted by him, I had to be utterly honest. Suppose some time I asked, I think you're wrong. I will never ask anything of you, he replied solemnly. that God does not tell me to ask. He continued, when I met my master Sri Yukteswar, he said to me, allow me to discipline you. Why, sir? I inquired. Because, he replied, in the beginning of the spiritual path, one's will is guided by whims and fancies. Mine was too until I met my guru, Lahiri Mahashai. It was only when I attuned my will to his wisdom-guided will that I found true freedom. In the same way, if you attune your will to mine, you too will find freedom. To act only on the inspiration of whims and fancies is not freedom but bondage. Only by doing God's will can you find what you are seeking. I see, I replied thoughtfully. Then from my heart I said, I give you my unconditional obedience. My Guru continued, when I met my master, he gave me his unconditional love as I have given you mine. He then asked me to love him in the same way, unconditionally. But I replied, Sir, what if I should ever find you less than a Christ-like master? Could I still love you in the same way? My master looked at me sternly. I don't want your love, he said. It stinks. I understand, sir, I assured him. He had struck at the heart of my greatest weakness, intellectual doubt. With feeling, I said to him, I give you my unconditional love. He went on to give me various instructions. Now then, come kneel before me. I did so. He made me repeat in the name of God, Jesus Christ, and the rest of our line of gurus, the vows of discipleship and of renunciation. Next he placed the forefinger of his right hand on my chest over the heart. For at least 2 minutes his arm vibrated almost violently. Incredibly, from that moment onward, my consciousness, in some all-penetrating way, was transformed. I left his interview room in a daze. Norman, on hearing that I'd been accepted, embraced me lovingly. It was unusual, to say the least, for anyone to be accepted so quickly. A few moments later, Master came out from behind the open curtain on the lecture platform. Smiling at us quietly, he said, "We have a new brother."
Now we are going to run over by a few minutes. Now just take the time. We're going to tune into that process again. So just close the eyes and tune into this very deep and sacred moment. We're in the Hollywood church, in that back room with Master Paramhansa Yogananda. And feel that you are with Swami Kriyananda, who is J. Donald Walters, this enthusiastic seeker, becoming disciple, transforming his life. And either feel that you are merging your astral body with J. Donald Walters' astral body, or feel that you are next to him or within him. Look up before you close your eyes, and let's tune into this moment. There standing Paramhansa Yogananda, and also tuning into that eager moment when you took discipleship first of all, or if you haven't taken discipleship, feel what discipleship would mean to you. But imagine the orange robes of Yogananda, those vast eyes, the vibrations overflowing from him, just as they did through the book Autobiography of a Yogi. And I'm going to keep those eyes closed and just imagine that Master is saying this to Swami once again, but also to you. So with that meditative state on your knees, even if you're sitting at that moment, Feel Master is saying this to you. All right, he said, you have good karma. Master saying this to you. You may join us. And then a few sentences. No, you have good karma. Otherwise, I wouldn't accept you. Gazing at you now with deep love, Master said, I give you my unconditional love. Drink this moment in. Swami says, immortal promise. I couldn't begin to fathom the depth of meaning in those words. Will you give me your unconditional love? Take a moment to reply. Swami, of course, said yes. Again, tuning in to Master is in front of you. And I will give you will you also give me your unconditional obedience? And we know the tussle that went through. Master continues on a few sentences later. When I met my master Sri Yukteswar, he said to me, allow me to discipline you. Why, sir? I inquired. Because, he replied, in the beginning of the spiritual path, one's will is guided by whims and fancies. Mine was too. Sri Yukteswarji continued, until I met my Guru, Lahiri Mahashaya. It was only by attuning my haphazard will to his wisdom-guided will that I found true freedom. And take this in for a moment. In the same way, if you attune your will to mine, Master says, you too will find freedom. Drink that in. To act only on the inspiration of whims and fancies is not freedom but bondage. Drink this in. Only by doing God's will can you find what you are seeking. And with that tussle, Swami says, and repeat in your own mind, in your own heart, I understand, sir. I assured him. He struck at the heart of my greatest weakness, intellectual doubt. With deep feeling, I said to him, I give you my unconditional love. Offer this to Master now. Master asked him, he's kneeling before him. He asked him to repeat in the name of God, Jesus Christ, and the rest of our line of gurus, the vows of discipleship and renunciation. Just take a moment. This isn't a vow, a discipleship vow, but just tuning into this precious, sacred moment. We're going to drink it in. Feel now as Master next placed the forefinger of his right hand on my chest over the heart. See, feel, think, Master, placing that forefinger over your heart. For at least 2 minutes, his arm vibrated almost violently. And let's just take for 2 minutes, Master flowing his consciousness, his blessings, his prayers into each one of us now. Reigniting discipleship. Incredibly, from that moment on, my consciousness, in some all-penetrating manner, was transformed. Now either staying in a meditative space as we close out for the next few minutes. This is a wonderful moment to really meditate on, really soaking in, really filling up and overflowing with this moment. When we renew our vows of discipleship at Master's birthday or at any other time, I just want to bring to attention, if you've taken discipleship through Ananda, you have the handbook on discipleship. In the back of this book, if you remember, is the ceremony of discipleship, where you can perform this at home. I encourage you, if you feel inspired, maybe after this talk, maybe sometime this week, that you just tune into this and take the time when you meditate in that ceremony, if you do it, or in your regular meditations or after this class, just to really take moments of being with Master. When we take those vows of discipleship, what I wanted to say was that we don't often have a long time there. But when you can do this ceremony at home, take 2 minutes, 5 minutes to really tune into Master blessing you and helping you to dive deeply. Meditate on this moment. I think this is one of those moments that Swami wanted us to meditate more deeply. Meditate on how you've changed since taking discipleship, if you've taken it. If you haven't taken it yet, meditate on what discipleship might mean for you. Really drink it in and tune into this talk that I've put there. I also, typically we won't do the whole chapter for 20 minutes, but I wanted to do this whole chapter today and to have it be more of an inward experience. Normally we'll do about 10 minutes of audio, which we've been doing the previous weeks. So just take this time to really, over the next few days, this coming week, to deepen that discipleship. One of the homeworks I really wanted to share with you last week but forgot was, if you don't do this in your practice, maybe you've done it, maybe you are doing it already, it's a wonderful time to tune into the consciousness of Master at the end of your meditation or at the beginning, looking into his eyes or looking into Swami Kriyananda's eyes, really drawing that consciousness in and attuning in that wonderful way. So we'll be back next week. I did put a link in the chat box for an upcoming Whispers retreat that I'm leading. The reason I'm saying this is that in this talk, Swamiji is talking about different ways that we can tune into Master and be in tune. And a wonderful way to do that is to dive into Whispers from Eternity. Master said, when I'm gone, I will talk to you through my whispers. So it's a blatant plug, but one that I think will be a wonderful way to tune into Master. Have a glorious week. Take time now after this moment to not just get up straight away if you can help it, and just have a few moments. We're going to meditate on parts, as I've said before, but go away and meditate on the points that really stuck out to you and take them into meditation, take them into your week, really ponder them. We have such little time in the class that it's important for us to dive even deeply in our week. God bless. Jai Guru, Jai Swamiji. Spread the light.